Welcome!
The first time I had to introduce myself in English was in a language class with new people around me. The teacher smiled and asked each student to stand up, say their name, and tell a little story about who they were. When my turn came, I felt my chest grow tight and my hands become cold. I knew simple words, and I had studied many small phrases before that day. But when I tried to put them together, my mind became slow and confused. I stood up and said, "My name is," and after that I stopped for a moment that felt much longer than it really was. I knew how to say where I was from, and I knew how to say my age, but the order of everything felt messy inside my head. I wanted to sound natural, but instead I felt like I was carrying many small pieces that did not fit together. I looked at the floor, then at the teacher, and tried to continue with a weak smile. Even though I knew words, I did not know how to organize my own story. That moment surprised me more than I expected, because the problem was not only English. I realized I did not know how to speak clearly about myself, even in a simple way. I could say facts like my name, my city, and a few things I liked, but when I tried to connect those facts, I felt lost. Who was I, really, beyond those short answers? What did I want to say about my life, my interests, and my future? These questions appeared in my mind while I was still standing there in front of the class. I finished my introduction with a few broken sentences, and then I sat down feeling embarrassed and frustrated. No one laughed at me, and the teacher was kind, but I still felt uncomfortable because I knew I could do better. During the rest of the class, I kept thinking about that moment and why it felt so difficult. I was not only afraid of grammar mistakes or pronunciation problems. I was also afraid because I had never learned how to tell my own story in a simple and honest way. That thought stayed with me for the rest of the day. When I got home, I sat on my bed and repeated the moment again and again in my head. At first I felt only nervous and disappointed, but slowly another feeling appeared behind those emotions. I felt a strong wish to change, not only to speak better English, but also to understand myself better. If I wanted to introduce myself with confidence, I needed more than vocabulary. I needed to know how to describe who I was, where I came from, and what I wanted. That first introduction made me uncomfortable, but it also opened a door I did not expect. After that difficult first introduction, I decided to start again in a simpler and calmer way. I took a notebook and wrote small facts about myself, the kind of facts I could really use in daily conversation. I wrote sentences like, "My name is," "I am from," "I like," and "I live with," because those felt clear and useful. At first they looked too simple, almost like children's sentences, but I reminded myself that simple does not mean weak. If I wanted to speak with confidence, I first needed a strong base. Every day after class, I stood in front of the mirror and practiced those sentences out loud. I tried to say them slowly, with a clear voice, and I listened carefully to my own pronunciation. Sometimes I repeated the same line 5 or 10 times until it sounded more natural in my mouth. I noticed that when I spoke too fast, I lost the sound of some words, so I began to slow down and breathe better. Little by little, the sentences stopped feeling strange and started to feel more like mine. That gave me a small but important kind of confidence. One afternoon, the teacher asked us to introduce ourselves again in pairs, and I felt ready enough to try. I stood up, smiled, and began with the sentences I had practiced. My name is. I am from. I live with. The first part went well, and I felt happy for a moment, but then I made a mistake in the next sentence and said something in the wrong way. I stopped, my face became warm, and I felt embarrassed because my partner was waiting for me to continue. That was the light climax of the moment, because I wanted to disappear for 1 second. But then I realized something important. The mistake was not the end, it was a sign that showed me exactly what I still needed to improve. Instead of giving up, I repeated the sentence again, this time more slowly and with better attention. My partner nodded kindly, and I understood that mistakes were not enemies if I used them well. They were like small lights showing where my weak points were. After class, I wrote that difficult sentence in my notebook and practiced it several times at home until it felt easier. That moment taught me that speaking well is not about never making mistakes. It is about noticing the mistake, learning from it, and continuing without losing courage. As the days passed, I also began to notice something deeper behind those simple facts about me. When I said I like or I live with, I was not only practicing English grammar. I was also choosing what parts of my life mattered most to share with others. That made me think more carefully about who I was and what I wanted people to understand about me. I started to see that introducing myself well was not only a language exercise. It also required self-knowledge, because I could not describe myself clearly in English if I did not know myself clearly first. After practicing small facts about myself for many days, I felt ready to build something bigger. I no longer wanted to say only short lines like, my name is, or I am from. I wanted to connect those ideas and speak about my life in a more complete way. So I started joining simple sentences together and making small parts of my story. I told myself that if I could build my story little by little, one day I would be able to speak about myself with real confidence. I began with the people closest to me, because family was the easiest place to start. I practiced sentences like, I live with my family, my mother is kind, and my father works a lot. Then I added other simple ideas about my daily life, such as I wake up early, I go to class, and I study English every day. I also spoke about the things I liked, saying, I like music, I enjoy walking, and I want to travel one day. These sentences were still short, but when I connected them, they began to sound like pieces of a real life. Every evening I repeated these small parts of my story out loud, sometimes in front of the mirror and sometimes while walking alone. The more I repeated them, the more natural they felt in my mouth, and my pronunciation slowly became clearer. I noticed that difficult sounds became easier when I used the same sentence many times in real practice. My voice felt less afraid, because the words were no longer new strangers to me. They had become familiar tools I could use again and again. That repetition was changing not only how I spoke, but also how I listened to myself. This became the first big climax of my journey, because I started to notice something deeper than language. While I was building my story in simple English, I also began to see patterns about myself that I had never stopped to think about before. I realized that I spoke often about family, effort, routine, and dreams of growing. I noticed that the things I chose to say were not random, they showed what mattered most to me. In a strange but beautiful way, English was helping me understand my own life better. It was no longer only a subject to study, but also a mirror where I could see myself more clearly. By the end of that stage, I felt different when I introduced myself, even if my English was still simple. I was no longer saying separate facts like a list from a notebook. I was beginning to tell a small but true story about who I was, how I lived, and what I wanted for the future. My pronunciation improved because I practiced these real phrases many times, but my confidence improved for another reason too. I was starting to know myself better through the words I chose. That made my English feel more honest, more alive, and much closer to my real voice. One day in class, after many weeks of practicing simple introductions, the teacher asked us a different kind of question. It was not about my name, my city, or the people in my house. She looked at me and asked, "What do you want for your future?" And the room suddenly felt much smaller. I understood every word, but I did not know how to answer right away. The problem was not only English in that moment. The problem was that I had never tried to say that answer clearly, even to myself. For a few seconds I almost froze, just like I had frozen on the first day when I tried to introduce myself. My mind searched for the right words, but it also searched for the right truth. I thought about saying something easy and short just to escape the moment, but I knew that would not help me. The question stayed there between me and the teacher, and I could feel that I had to face it honestly. I was not only trying to speak English. I was trying to understand what I truly wanted to become and how to say it with simple words. So I took a breath, slowed down, and gave myself permission to answer in a basic way. I said, I want a good future. I want to study, work, and help my family. My sentence was not beautiful or advanced, but it was true, and that truth gave it strength. Then I added, I want to be a better person, and I want to learn more every day. As I spoke, I felt my voice become steadier, because the words were simple but honest. For the first time, I was not only practicing English, I was also speaking from a real place inside me. The teacher smiled and nodded, and that small reaction made me feel relieved and proud at the same time. She did not correct every detail or ask for a more complicated answer. Instead, she listened carefully, as if my simple sentences already had enough meaning. That was the second big climax of my journey, because I realized something important in that moment. I did not need perfect English to express something real. I needed clear words, calm breathing, and the courage to answer honestly, even when I was still discovering the answer inside myself. After class, I kept thinking about that question while I walked home. What do you want for your future was still in my mind, but now it felt different. It no longer sounded like only an English exercise. It sounded like a mirror that asked me to look at my own life more carefully. I understood then that learning English was helping me do something deeper than building sentences. It was helping me organize my own story, my hopes, and my future in a way I could finally hear. And that made the language feel more personal, more useful, and much more alive. By the end of this journey, I noticed that introducing myself no longer felt like a battle inside my head. The words did not come out perfectly every time, but they came out with much more clarity and confidence than before. When someone asked who I was, I could answer without that long, painful pause that used to stop me. I could say my name, where I was from, what I liked, what I dreamed about, and why those things mattered to me. My English was still simple, but now it sounded like it belonged to me. One day in class, the teacher asked us to introduce ourselves again, just like on that first difficult day. This time, when I stood up, I felt nervous for only a moment, and then my voice began to move more naturally. I said, my name is. I am from. I live with my family, and I like learning new things. Then I added a few more sentences about my daily life, my goals, and the kind of person I wanted to become. I was not speaking quickly like a native speaker, but I was speaking clearly, and people could follow my story. That difference felt huge to me. My pronunciation had also changed because I had practiced real phrases about my own life so many times. I repeated those sentences in front of the mirror, in my room, while walking, and during quiet moments of the day. The sounds became more familiar because they were not random textbook examples. They were my words about my real world. That made my mouth trust them more, and it made my voice stronger. I could hear that I was improving, not because I had memorized many difficult expressions, but because I had built a simple and honest way to speak. Practicing my own story had made English feel less foreign and more personal. That was the final climax of my journey, because I finally understood what this learning process had truly given me. I did not only learn vocabulary, sentence order, or pronunciation through repetition. I also built a voice that could tell others who I am, where I come from, and what I want. English was no longer only a school subject or a test of grammar in my mind. It had become a bridge between my thoughts and the outside world, and that bridge felt stronger every day. For the first time, I felt that my English was carrying something real, my story. When I went home that day, I felt more peaceful and more confident than I had felt at the beginning of this path. I still knew I had a lot to learn, and I knew more difficult questions would come in the future. But now I trusted myself more, because I had seen what practice, honesty, and patience could do. I had a new relationship with English, and also a new relationship with myself, because the language had helped me hear my own voice more clearly. In the end, I understood that learning English was never only about speaking another language. It was also about learning how to stand up and say, with courage, "This is who I am."